Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Hannah Blackwell, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my November wrap-up. So in November, I hosted Once Upon a Readathon, and it was a month-long readathon that was tons of fun. It was a super busy month, so I actually had kind of a slow reading month. I only read 9 books, but that's still a great reading month, I think. I'm going to go over all the books that I read for Once Upon a Readathon and in the month of November. I think only one book I didn't use for the readathon, and everything else I did. Before I get started, I just wanted to let you know all of my social media is linked down below. If you've watched my videos before and you've not subscribed, I would love for you to do so. Please click the like button and comment down below and let me know how your month was in November. What was your favorite book that you read? Let's just go ahead and get into this wrap up. The first book that I read in November was Once Upon a Dream by Sierra Simone, and I read this book for the prompt of Once Upon a or Time and for retelling. Those were 2 of the prompts in the first step of the readathon, and I gave this book 3 stars. It is a bind up of 3 different short stories that are each retellings of fairy tales. There's The Princess and the Pea, 12 Dancing Princesses, and then Snow White and Rose Red. They were not your typical retellings. They were contemporary, and they were extremely dark and steamy, super kinky and taboo. The bind up was fine. I'm not a huge short story person, and I didn't think that anything about this was superb. So I just gave it 3 stars. It was good for what I wanted. It was a smutty retelling, and it was a fun time. The next book that I read was The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. This was the second book in the Winternight trilogy, the first being The Bear and the Nightingale. And this is a Russian and folktale inspired series that is set in what is modern day Russia during the medieval time period. The Mongolian Empire was at its height. And the first book is basically about Vasilisa and her growing up. Her mother passes away, her father remarries, and her stepmother is a very religious Catholic, and Vasilisa she can see the spirits of the forest and the spirits that are told in Russian folktales. They're kind of at odds with each other. It is about Vasilisa being able to connect with spirits that most people cannot see. And this has a different setting. The second book, it is set in Moscow, and Vasilisa's older now. And I can't really tell you much about this because it is the second book in the trilogy, but I will say I gave it 5 stars. I adored this book. Really wasn't a surprise. I absolutely adored the first book. I've already read it twice, and yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I read this for red, orange, yellow, or brown on the cover, and it got me hard mode because as you can see, there is orange and yellow, and you could argue brown too. So this got me 150 points, and I gave it 5 stars and absolutely adored it. The next book I read in November was The Kraken Sacrificed by Katie Robert. This was the second book in this series. The first one was The Dragon's Bride, and I really liked that book. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, but I really, really liked it. This book was a total disappointment. I gave this book 1 star. I used this book for the prompts of a book with a map, because it does have a map in the beginning, however small. And I also used it for a newly acquired book and got 200 points, but I actually gave it 1 star, and I technically DNF'd this book at 70%. I don't usually rate books that I have DNF'd, but because I got so far into it and just didn't care to finish it, I counted it. You take that rating with a grain of salt because I did not technically finish the book, but this was a giant disappointment. I did not feel like the characters were dealt with well. I did not feel like the characters had any chemistry at all, and I thought that she also dealt with the trauma of these characters very poorly. Just everything altogether was done very poorly. I didn't even think the smut was done well. All in all, this was not what I would have come to expect from Katie Robert. I just thought it was pretty awful. Next, for the third step, I read The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I really liked this book. I thought it was a really great start to an epic fantasy series. This is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty, and I've been wanting to read this series for a long time, and I really enjoyed this book. It is very dense because you are being given so much information about different factions, different areas in this world, different political ideas. A lot. There's a lot going on, but you're introduced to this empire where the emperor has taken over Dara and these 7 kingdoms and tried to unify them and force this unification on them, basically for the greater good. And you see the aftermath of that, and we watch this uprising happen and these revolutions. It's very interesting. It is very heavy and dense, very slow moving, character driven, and world building driven, not plot driven. So I understand why a lot of people have issues and have trouble with this book. Generally, it's the worst rated book in the series. And I give it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, but I am a lover of politics and fantasy, and especially if they're done well. And I think this was done really well, and it was really interesting for me to sink my teeth into. I really liked it. So I used this for the prompts of a book featuring a romance, a book featuring family, and a new to you author. I did not get hard mode with this, which would have been a debut author, but I got 300 points from this book and I really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to continue on in this series. The next book I read in November was Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marlier. I had this book on my 5-star predictions, and I was so happy that it lived up to that expectation. I did give this book 5 stars. I absolutely adored it. I have to say that this is probably now my favorite Juliette Marlier book I've ever read. I loved it. This is a retelling of the same fairy tale that the 6 Crimson Cranes is based off of. We have Sorsha, and her brothers have been cursed by this enchantress, and her brothers are now swans, and she cannot speak, and she has to finish this task in order to break this curse and free her brothers and herself. And it is a fantasy romance. It is historical with a soft magic system because it is like a historical fairy tale retelling. This set in Ireland and then also in England at a point as well. I was able to get all 350 points, so that includes hard mode for the 4th step of the readathon with this book. So that was a book with magic, a historical setting, and 300 plus, or hard mode 450 plus pages. So I was able to get all 350 points with this book, and I gave it 5 stars. So a win-win-win-win. And I loved it. I loved this book so much. The next book that I read was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, and this is the first book in the Throne of Glass series. Everyone's read this probably except for me. I do have a few friends that are actually currently reading this for the first time. Rye from Rye's Reading Corner and my friend Crystal from Bond Book Reviews. We didn't plan to buddy read it, and we're not really like keeping up with a buddy read for it, but I just found that interesting that I do have a few friends that are reading it for the first time, because I thought everyone had already read this series. So I actually started with Throne of Glass. I know a lot of people like to start with Assassin's Blade, but I started with Throne of Glass and I really enjoyed it. We have our main character who has been locked up in a prison. She used to be this like badass assassin. She's been locked up and then taken out to compete in a competition to become the king's assassin. The story goes from there. I really enjoyed it. I cannot wait to continue on the series. I gave this 4 stars. I don't think there's a whole bunch to say about this because everyone's talked about this series. It is a very famous Sarah J. Maas book. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't like amazing, and it wasn't my favorite Sarah J. Maas book, but it had that Sarah J. Maas like book candy effect on me where I'm just like, give me more. She just has an addictive quality to her writing. and I had a lot of fun. I read this to go back and pick up the royalty prompt from the first step of the readathon. The next book that I read for the readathon was Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. I really like this book. I gave it 4 stars. This is about the daughter of a moon goddess, and it takes place in the celestial kingdom in this mythical, magical realm. Basically, there's multiple realms in this, and I loved the world building. I loved the magic systems. It was very like elemental, but like soft magic system, I would say. And I loved this. It's a classic Chinese legend, and it was definitely plot driven, not character driven. It was pretty fast paced. There was a lot going on, but it was a fun time, and I cannot wait to continue on. I think this is a duology, so I'm looking forward to reading the next book. I think that just came out. I read this book for 2 prompts in the final step, so for a book with a conflict and a pulpit. And I really, I had a good time. Next, I picked up a really quick monster romance on my Kindle app. This was Monster's Temptation. This is a Why Choose monster romance. I read it for a morally gray or unlikable character. We have monsters in here, and especially one of the monsters we're not sure whether is like good or bad. And so this was fine. Big trigger warnings in here. This book is super problematic, I will say, and there's lots of trigger warnings, so check those out before you pick it up. But this book was fine. I don't know if I'll continue on in the series. I gave it 3 stars. It was what I wanted at the time, but it was not anything special, and it wasn't like especially well written either. But I had a good time with it, so I give it 3 stars. And like I said, I picked up 100 points for this book for unlikable or morally gray character. And yeah, it was less than 200 pages too. It was a really quick read. A final book that I read in November was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I just read this, and it was a perfect way to get kind of like ready for the winter season, because this is such like a chill-inducing, atmospheric, wintry, icy book. This is a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, but a lot of people, we actually had a live show discussion for Femmes Afictionados for this book on Sunday, and Kaylee was our guest host, and she was talking about how actually there is the classic Cinderella story. This is a retelling of that as well, because we do follow multiple characters. And we also discussed one of the other characters. There may have actually been a 3rd fairy tale retelling in this. Each character has their own like retelling possibly in this, but the retelling that this book is most well known for is Rumpelstiltskin, because we do follow Miriam, and she is known for turning silver to gold, but not like in a magic sense, more of like a real world, she's really good with money kind of sense. And she takes over the family business to earn the interest from lending money. So she comes from a family of money lenders, and that is how they make their money. And she garners the attention of the Fae King, and these are like frosty, like ice fae, and she gets the attention of them, and they want to come take her and make her their bride. And this is a really interesting book. I really enjoyed it. I gave this 4.25 stars. I really loved the whole book. The only issue I had with it was the clarity of the climax it left me wanting, and it left me confused. And that was actually the same problem I had with Naomi Novik's Uprooted. That was her other retelling. That was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. But I had the same issue with the clarity of her climaxes, and whether or not when everything comes together at the epitome, at the peak of the plot, it doesn't come together quite clearly or just well. But other than that, the whole book I enjoyed. So I gave it 4.25 stars. Just had a great time with it. I love the atmosphere. I love the characters. I really liked it. This was the only book that I read in November that I didn't use for anything in Once Upon a Readathon, because at this point I had actually already completed all of the prompts including 3 of the hard mode prompts. So for Once Upon a Readathon, I was able to gain 1,650 points. The only prompts that I did not complete were 2 hard mode points. The max that you can get for Once Upon a Readathon going through 1 round is 1,750. So 1,650 I thought was really great. And I had a lot of fun. I had a great time with Once Upon a Readathon. Thank you everyone who participated. Thank you guys, especially thank you to the co-hosts for all of the help. You guys were amazing. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time. And I hope you guys did too. Especially a shout out to the fairy godmothers, winners of Once Upon a Readathon. And yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing out this year strong, getting a lot of reading done in December, having like a chill month and just doing a lot of reading and cozying up and having just a nice wintry wonderland of a month. I love December. I love the holidays. If you like this video, don't forget to click the like button. Let me know down below, what was your favorite book that you read this month? Did you participate in Once Upon a Readathon? And if so, what team were you on? Don't forget to subscribe if you have not already subscribed. All of my social media is linked down below, including my Goodreads, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Until next time, fellow readers, keep reading and living your best life.